Yo, welcome back to Play Free FC, real conversations with the people who shape the game. This is part three in the final episode of our series with Mark Franek, teacher at YSC Academy and author of the American Soccer Nation. In part two, we left off with the rise of early American soccer leagues, the influence of guys like Thomas Cahill, aka Bullets, and Archie Stark, and the reminder that soccer in America never disappeared. It was always here. And now in part three, we pick up with the collapse of the NASL, the wilderness years, so to speak, of American soccer, the shot heard around the world, the 94 Cup, the birth of the MLS, and where the game in this country is headed next. And honestly, this conversation becomes about a lot more than soccer. It's about identity development, belief, and what the future of the American game can actually become. And it's a lot of fun. And I'm super grateful for Mark's time and all that he has taught all of us along this 3-part journey. So thank you, Mark. And a huge thanks, as always, to all the folks that support us, Philly Soft Pretzel Factory in Langhorne, Hill and Sea, and Save Site Now. And obviously, make sure you go out and grab Mark's book, American Soccer Nation, available now wherever books are sold. This has just been an absolute joy. And here is episode 3, American Soccer Nation, written by Mark C. Franek. And let's finish out this, John. Hey, welcome back. Part 3 of our series addressing American Soccer Nation and talking to my boy Mark Franek here. Thanks for coming back, bud.
Thank you for having me.
We covered a lot in the first episode, and we wanted to make it 2-part series just so we can get through everything because we think it's important, and it was very well received. And we ended right at the end of the NASL. Let's start at the 86. So we didn't qualify for 86. We don't have a professional league outside of the indoor league, correct? So most of our best players are playing college soccer.
Just to be a little more specific, we had semi-pro leagues pretty much on both sides of the coast, and then going up into Canada that were undoubtedly full of a lot of really good people and players, but it wasn't fully professional. So it was not necessarily back into the desert, but we were limping into the late 80s. Americans were playing professional on real grass anywhere in the world in the late 80s.
So you had these teams on both coasts. We're also talking the VEs and UGHs of the world too. You're playing at a high level there as well,
Yeah,
right?
sure. Right. So Freddie and the listeners from the Philadelphia area, there are these old clubs in the United States, particularly in the tri-state area here, that were making and doing really well on the national stage. If you look at it from the perspective of the cups of that time, the amateur and open cups. For example, if I'm not mistaken, the Philadelphia Ukrainians won no less than 3 open cups during that particular year, the late 50s into the early 60s. And for many years, put them at the very top of the heap. Nowadays, I think the Ukrainians are in the top 10 of how many open cups they've won because they've been surpassed by the Seattle Sounders, maybe Kansas City team, and the MLS will continue to win more open cups. But imagine that some of these clubs that our listeners played on, including you and I, have these long roots in these communities going back decades. And during the time operating behind the NASL, they still had these fully functioning clubs with some really good players and wonderful communities purring along before, during, and after the NASL collapse. And of course, they're still around today. You can take your sons and daughters there, get your pierogi, get yourself a drink in a lot of these clubs that have existed almost 100 years. Some of them, if you look back to the Erkskebergs and the VEs and the United German Hungarians and Ukrainians, that's just 3. They're within an hour in Philly. And I'm sure there are pods all over New Jersey and all around the world that have a very similar scenario.
Yeah, they're very special places and they remain that way. Okay, we have these fledgling leagues, semi-pro, you're calling them. You don't qualify for 86. What kind of setback was that? Or was it the expectation looking back on it is like, no kidding, we didn't qualify for 86?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, and then let's just jump into what I quote unquote modern era. We didn't qualify for 1986. And again, we are still in what's called the soccer desert. The USSF is small, amateurish, maybe a couple employees, if you can even call them full-time employees. And we're patching together teams to play international games on short notice with a part-time coach, with little to no preparation, with rosters that are cobbled together by group effort, which is always a bad idea. And you had many of the NASL teams even that would not even release their players for many of these. So there was a plethora of problems that was preventing the United States from really putting on a good show in all these qualifying events. And we didn't qualify. After 1950 on up to the 1990 World Cup, the United States failed to qualify for every single iteration of the World Cup. And in 86, to your point, we failed yet again. And here's how we failed. We needed to win against Costa Rica at a home game to continue our qualifying campaign. And the USSF scheduled this game on Torrance, maybe mispronouncing that, California, to sell tickets to Costa Ricans, right? To gin up some support for the game. Of course, putting short-term financial gain ahead of trying to qualify for the cup. Our USSF, as wonderful as they've been doing and improving, right? It's proving, is still, let's all be honest, is littered with almost 100 years of mismanagement and sheer amateur decisions. And again, I don't want to cast aspersion entirely over the people who've been involved for 100 years, but I think historians know, and also people know, that we just for many decades didn't get it right. So we didn't qualify for 86, and now we're going in 1990, where the World Cup was in Italy. And Freddie, we lost out on the bid to host United States 1986 World Cup. We had a nice bid, but it went to Mexico, who had already hosted. And there's a story about that. Don't need to get into it, but we lost the bid. So now we're getting in 90. Italy already has the right to host. And in about 1988 or so, we do another bid to host in 94. At which point this bid was a much better type of bid, 400 pages, professionally written by this lawyer, Scott Letelier. And after he had witnessed the success of the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, and he palled around with FIFA people there, and he knew what FIFA was looking for. And not only just the profit, of course, but how to put on a elite performance across 3 time zones, and the video electronic capabilities that he put into that bid really showed FIFA, hey, we may not have a professional league, but we know how to put on a good TV show. And viewers, listeners might be interested to know, I think it's 1988, FIFA chose July 4th, of course, Independence Day, to announce that the United States had won the right to host in 1994 with one glorious catch. United States in 88, you have no fully functioning professional league to speak of. Yes, he will give you the right to host in 94, but you must create a top professional league in and around that time. And it was essentially the only gift that FIFA gave us, was this little pressure to just get this right. And of course, that didn't happen overnight. It happened over the next 6-7 years when the MLS people got together, which, has books of its own dedicated to the genesis of the MLS. So now we're in 1990. Can the U.S. qualify on merit, which they have not been able to do for 50 years, which is, of course, a long time in soccer, FIFA. That's just terrible that we haven't been able to qualify on our own.
How important was Paul Caligiuri's goal to U.S. soccer?
Of course, this is the shot heard around the world, which is what the newspaper pundits and writers had talked about at the time, quoting a poem by a famous American poet, that when Paul Caligiuri scores his goal at the end of the first half in Port-au-Prince, Trinidad and Tobago, it was, of course, if you would say, the genesis of the rising of the American eagle, if you will, from the ashes. It never been completely dead, but we had been floundering around for half a century. And here we have a bunch of college kids, almost to a roster spot, playing in an away match that they had to win in order to qualify. And Trinidad and Tobago, if they won or tied, if I'm not mistaken, they would have qualified for their first ever World Cup. So it was a big deal. And it's hard to go in even today into some of these Latin American or Caribbean countries and win. Imagine the pressure that must have been on the collective shoulders of the young men who found themselves in this island country with the pressure to win the game, to go to the World Cup, to qualify and merit. All this business and wonderful storylines is told by a really cool movie called The $1 Billion Goal with Grant Wall and some other execs to tell a great story. For those listeners who haven't seen it, it's a couple part. I think it's a 3-part story that covers this in all its glory. So yes, Paul Caligiuri gets this pass from Tab Ramos. That's in the air. Tab Ramos, by the way, one of the greatest American players that we've ever had. I think he ranks up there in most people's top 10. And he passed it to Paul. Paul chests it down, moves it into some free space, opens up his hips from outside the 18 box, and it just bends into the back post area. And boom, a nail-biting 60 minutes or so ensues, and we dodge a couple bullets and win the game and thus qualify for the 1990 World Cup on merit for the first time, of course, since our appearance against the Three Lions, the English, in 1950.
Incredible. And I wanted to ask you the question of what if you did not score that? But I feel like we'll spend way too much time talking about the inevitable in that situation.
Yeah.
Trinidad and Tobago is a funny way of jumping up in U.S. soccer history for us.
Oh, yeah. There's got to be a book about the bookends of what happened there and then what happened again, of course, in 2016, 17, right?
So they get to the World Cup. They get kind of beat pretty badly in the first game. Take Italy did they not lose Italy 1-0? Italy goes on. So it's a good showing, what we say.
It is a good showing. Let's talk about it briefly. And then, of course, for the listeners, we're not going to go through every iteration of the World Cup now that the United States gets into. You know, we qualified and went to and performed in every World Cup from 1990 to 2026, with the exception of the World Cup in Russia in 2018. I got that right. Yes, 2018. So with that cycle, notwithstanding that cycle, we qualified for all of them. And of course, people are going to say, well, you didn't qualify for 2 of them on merit, the one in 94 and 2026 you're hosting. But come on, America's been doing just fine in the last 30 years. So we go into Italy with a bunch of college kids. The English press are complaining about us. This one English journalist calls them a galumphing, a galumphing. That's an English negative word, a galumphing side of corn-fed college boys, corn-fed, like that, you know, slow, don't deserve to be there. But we qualified and we sent this young team there. Remember, guys and gals, no professional sports leagues in America with anyone playing soccer on real grass at the time. So we send our side over there and we come up against Czechoslovakia, Italy, the host, and Austria, 3 bigwigs. I'm not going to say it's the group of death, but listen, the odds are stacked against us and we lose all 3 games. But we put on a pretty good show, particularly for the Italians. And there's videos of this, you know, the Italians not necessarily gave us a standing ovation, but it was respected for the showing that our young men put up. And in my book, in a page or so, I talk about this. Imagine our boys are getting an education, you know, they're college kids. The pros, the full pros they're playing against wouldn't know a college textbook if it fell out of their locker in Rome or Turin in Italy, right? They're fully professional, polished pros that we're coming up against when we're playing Czechoslovakia, Italy, and Austria. And our side puts in a good shift and a good effort. And by the way, Americans had sent, you know, unrelated to the athletes, had sent a whole bevy of next World Cup host people. So the Americans look at what the Italians were doing, and they didn't put on a good show. It was one of the worst attended World Cups. It was plagued by low scoring because FIFA hadn't yet changed the goals and the rules about the offsides rule. And it was just a defensive affair, a lot of really bad games and not a really good crowd support, if you will. So the American delegation took note to prepare us for this relaunch of soccer in America, which is now going into the 94 World Cup on American soil.
All right. Great. We're at 94. Was 1994 the moment American soccer arrived, or was it the moment American soccer earned the right to start over?
Yeah, good question. There's some wonderful journalists that have been around a lot longer than me that have written and talked about this. I think Hal Phillips, in a celebrated book, calls it Generation Zero, the men and the men within, you know, roster distance of this generation, this first generation, what you call the rebirth, 94. Listen, without a doubt, to host a World Cup successfully when most of the rest of the world are looking at the Yanks, affectionate term nowadays, looking at us as if, my God, how are you guys going to put on a World Cup? You call it soccer, even though it's, of course, the English word. They were looking at this skeptical World Cup as if we couldn't pull it off. And we did. Not only did we pull it off, the fields were immaculate. I mean, we even managed to grow grass inside the Pontiac. So, I mean, it wasn't growing in there. It was put on sods, rolled out in there. We started a whole new industry. Yanks, Trey Rogers, this guy from Michigan State, if I'm not mistaken, and he created a whole business. And every field, the gridiron fields around the country in 3 time zones. So there was nary a piece of grass or a blade of grass out of place. Yeah, Americans know how to put on a good show. The 94 didn't get off to a great start. You had Diana Ross, Oprah Winfrey, if you may recall of her fame. She almost fell off the stage in the opening game for the Yanks at the Pontiac. And then Diana Ross was singing in her red jumpsuit down the center of the pitch, rolling soccer into the American living rooms. And here she gets to the other end of the pitch, and there's a ball waiting for her and a goal. And she takes the shot at the goal, and she misses wide. And the goal breaks away, which the anti-soccer lobby likes. Look, the goal broke. It was supposed to break. That was part of the show. Now, she was supposed to make the penalty kick, of course, but we shouldn't get down on Diana Ross because 28 days later, Roberto Baggio also missed, not on that pitch, but people may recall, quote, the man who died standing, end quote, with our wonderful Roberto Baggio with his Buddhist ponytail, who missed that goal wide. And while the Brazilians rushed around him in such glee, he hung his head. So there's no fault in anyone missing a penalty kick. But to put a point on it, the United States put on a great show, and FIFA made a lot of money. And for the first time, mind you, usually World Cups were not generating too much of a profit, and it was an edgy business. But the Americans succeeded in doing what they said they were going to do, broadcasting soccer around the world, harnessing our great technology and TV. And the Americans put on a good show. We got out of our group, and then we lost to the eventual World Cup champions, Brazil, in a hard-fought match in the round of 16. So bravo to the Americans, bravo to the Yanks, bravo to the restart. And now we have to look forward to our promise to FIFA and our promise to the American fans. Okay, when is the MLS coming? Let's get into this. Let's restart. And now we're bumping up into 1986 and the genesis and the unrolling of Major League Soccer.
Right.
Sorry. Yep. Thank you for correcting me.
I want to go back and ask just one question, just out of curiosity. Did you go to a World Cup game in 1994?
I did not go in 1994. In 1994, I was playing Icelandic soccer, and my wife takes a little interest in my soccer accolades. So she's probably never going to listen to this. But in 1994, I was happily playing soccer in Iceland during the summer, probably enjoying my summer immensely with my Icelandic girlfriend. And this was minimum 20 years before I met you. So I cannot be criticized for it. So I was out of the country watching the World Cup unfold on American soil with my Icelandic friends, living gloriously 90 days away from America before I came back to teach again.
That's great. I vividly remember going to Italy versus Ireland up at Giant Stadium with the Chamonix High School Hall of Fame coach, Hal Heffelfinger, and Rich Reese, All-American from Penn State, and my father, and having the greatest time. I was 18 years old, and it was fantastic. What an experience.
Wonderful. What was the stadium like on that day?
You heard the ooh-ah Paul McGrath chants. I still have it in my head. I had never experienced a soccer game like that before. I remember seeing the World Cup as a child, but experiencing it was something that I'll never forget. And also, which has me excited and sad about this World Cup, and we'll get into that in a second. Yeah. All right. So 1996, the MLS. Let's talk about that.
MLS got started as an idea between lawyer Alan Rothenberger, who was also the FIFA American USSF president at the time, who had just put on in 1994 the most successful World Cup in history. And of course, part of his duties was he wasn't running around trying to get, the entire United States and the Federation was designing this soccer, the rebirth of soccer, at which point there's this figure, Mark Abbott, who was an associate, a young attorney at the time, 26, 27, 28, behind the years leading up to the 94 World Cup, was busy putting together the MLS system. And viewers may note that, yeah, it was organized and the founding documents were written by lawyers. I know lawyers get a bad name, but there's been a lot of really wonderful lawyers in American soccer, and we should give credit where credit is due. This guy, Mark Abbott, Alan Rothenberger, how can we create a league on American soil after we know that leagues in the past have failed horribly? 3 deaths, 1894 to 1895, 1821 to 1931, and the NASL of 1968 to 1984. And they failed for various reasons, but one of the major reasons they failed is because it did not support league-wide phenomena of making sure that everybody knew they were connected. What happened is certain owners who didn't have the best interest of soccer long-term in all these leagues made a parade of stupid decisions that ultimately led to the death of the league. So when the lawyers were putting together the rules in the league documents, they had to figure out a way to give some protections for the good of the game. It does no good if you create a wonderful product that dies after 5, 10 years. So they had to do this sharing thing, and there's books devoted to it. Just to hit briefly on it, it was established as a quote unquote single entity structure with the idea that an ownership group who buys into the league buys into a revenue sharing and a corporate interest, that you're buying into the right, the corporate right to run your own local team, but you also share revenues with however many other ownership groups are in the league through a various processes that get revised every year. But you cannot just go and do what you want to do. Like if you're the New York Cosmos, you can't spend incessantly. You have to share ticket sales after a certain amount of tickets are sold. Now, these things have changed, but the point is, for the viewers who we complain about the MLS all the time, being a locked structure and no promotion relegation, well, before you complain about it, please do some research about why it exists and what the single entity structure means and how it's evolved over 30 years. And I think that's important for readers and all of us to know. It's unique because America is unique, and it is unique in a legal sense because we had to figure out a way to do it for the long term and to not repeat the mistakes that we've made in the past.
And those mistakes include player development.
Oh,
And
right.
and is this something that the MLS got right?
Well, not at first, of course.
Okay.
I think the league, they're talking about player development. Well, listen, let's just talk about it like a dad or a mom or any of us or wherever we are in the soccer universe. Reasonable people can debate about the legal structure of MLS or whether it's a good product, a great product, a poor product, or all depends. Everyone has opinions on it. And respectfully, there's a lot of good points, whether you're an MLS lover, liker, or hater. I get it. But let's all agree that youth development in the United States matters, and it has to be connected in more than one way to the top league. That in order to support soccer and as it expands around the American nation, youth development is paramount, because without teaching and developing young people, right, we're not going to be able to produce people who follow and consume soccer at an elite level. An elite level means domestically. Support your top pro league. Support your local MLS team. Support your USL team. Go to college. Play as well as you can for 4 or 5 years. And support your college soccer team. We are all connected. So youth development is of paramount importance to the top league, and it should be of paramount importance to all of us in the American soccer ecosystem. Because without youth development and smart people putting time and energy into it, we were just going to be mediocre at soccer. We'll be good, but not very good, and certainly not great unless we get the youth development stuff right. Now, that is the subject of 1,000 podcasts and
Yeah.
1,000 books. But yes, youth development and MLS need to work in tandem, as well as every other soccer program, at least more in tandem than we even currently are doing today.
And I know that's how you close your book out, but I guess, would you say that's when MLS sort of stopped being in surviving mode and started actually building?
Right. So the MLS has been now 30 years. Let's look at that. 1996, 2026. We're into this league for 30 years now. So it's the longest professional soccer league we've had. And they've gotten some things right. They've gotten some things wrong. They're tinkering with it. Their first 5 years were not a success. the first year, it ginned up, it comes 2 years or so after the World Cup. There was a lot of, not a lot, relatively. It was successful in its opening year averages across the league and some of the TV stuff that the MLS people were sharing with the TV. We were sharing the production costs to try to spur growth, but it was not a success story. In fact, the first 5 years of the MLS was going in the opposite direction. This is well documented. I talk about it in a book briefly, but there's been books written about it. So you're moving into the 2000s, into this century, with looking at an MLS product that was moving in the opposite direction, losing fans. Some teams were having financial difficulties, and the owners had only promised these soccer-specific stadiums. But in the year 2000, there was only one operating, and that was that wonderful Columbus Crew Stadium purring along in the middle of Ohio, which, by the way, when it opened in 1999, it quickly drew the most fans on average across the league. They're scoring for the MLS people that, yeah, soccer specific stadiums matter. They're important, even paramount for the long-term life of the league. And if you build them and you build them right and you honor the fans in the local region, they will reward you with following the team. People don't want to come to a 70,000 seat stadium. They want to come to their local soccer specific stadium wearing their own colors. And it would be great if they also had a youth academy on down to the U8 level where everybody can buy into this system and the idea that a couple of your hometown boys may end up playing. I mean, this is not rocket science, right? On a grand scheme, develop youth academies, get the super clubs around to push your kids. This is a big debate. I know this. People don't lose their best players to the MLS teams, but come on, guys, they have the pipeline to the promised land. And that's where fans are going on the weekends and want to watch football. So let's get with the program and let's realize we're all connected.
Yeah, and apologies if I'm jumping around a little bit, but you said the Columbus Crew, which made me think of a good friend of mine, Matt Napoleon, who All-American goalkeeper at the Chamonix, played at Columbia. He was on the Olympic team, was part of that first Project 40 that you mentioned in your book. How impactful was Project 40 in terms of the development? And yeah.
Good. Now, listen, I don't know. I know about this. I'm certainly no expert in this. My guess is that Project 40 was a stopgap. That makes it sound negative. Project 40 was created to fill what I believe was a vacuum because the teams that are in the league at the time did not have fully functioning youth academies. So they have these players that they're pushing up or that are getting signed, Americans, and of course, internationals as well. But there's no ability, only 11 people start, of course, right? Maybe 15 people play in a game on every weekend in the year 2000. Well, where are these other guys going to play? And how are the teams developing and getting the kids out of college or signed when there's not a lot of youth development yet happening on each team level? You create the system that was supported by Adidas and then Nike and then other these companies where you're trying to give playing opportunities to the players. And I think that's where the Project 40 name came from. Like, we want you to have at least 40 serious high-level elite games outside of whatever your schedule you're going. And that means you can maybe be rostered or on an MLS team, but on a weekend, you might go play quote unquote A level for that game, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a way to get kids in between in their late teens, in their early 20s, in between the college scenario and the real lack of youth development teams across the league, an opportunity to apply their trade, get paid, and see that there's a real path to the first team. And that has since evolved tremendously over the last 25 years. And it doesn't exist the way it existed then. It's been taken over almost completely by the MLS teams and their bigger MLS Next program.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting to me because I very distinctly remember that I was in college during that time as well, playing, and it was really neat to see friends going through it.
Friends or colleagues that may have been in a Project 40 program? Did you know any guys that were doing that? And
Matt Napoleon for sure, and then I'm sure there's a couple of guys from Delco that went, like the Ben Olsons of the world. Maybe they were involved in that. I don't recall. All right, so let's jump to Beckham. I think this piece is interesting. What did Beckham change for the MLS?
All right, the David Beckham phenomenon. The Beckham Experiment is the title of a great book by the late, great Grant Walls that we should give a shout out to. It's another wonderful American writer who unfortunately passed away of a heart attack during Qatar, the World Cup, literally abroad. But he has written for 2 decades, maybe even 3, and then later in his career did some great podcasts. One of America's greatest writers, if you will, and supporters of soccer. He wrote this book that was published maybe 2010. I'm going to get these dates wrong, but he covered the LA Galaxy and he covered the Beckham signing. And the name, the Beckham experiment, was not a title that he thought up. It was the phrase that the people who were involved in the LA Galaxy and the MLS and the Real Madrid people were using at the time when they were trying to woo David from Real Madrid onto the LA Galaxy. It was called an experiment. So I thought that was fascinating when you read his book. They didn't know whether it would work. And why? There's a lot of reasons. First off, the league documents had to change. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to realize about David. Apart from whether he played well or not so well, or eventually helped the LA Galaxy, that's fine. That's a story in and of itself. But what it did was it caused the league to modify their controlling documents on the level of the legal front to allow teams to sign players above and beyond the quote unquote salary cap, which allowed the MLS to move one step away from its rigid documents where every team was signing and the salaries and the wage were being owned by the league as opposed to individual teams. And this has its own story that's been covered by others, is how that DP designated players have evolved, homegrown players, all these weird rules, weird from an international perspective, because the head coach is funny. I find it's funny. They come into a lot of MLS teams are being coached by international coaches who don't have any governing document ever in any league they ever played in or coached in that looks like what the MLS is doing. They get here and like, oh, we got to buy our way out of profit. You can't just buy your way out of profit. So David Beckham, one of the things that he did is he got and the lawyers involved and the business people that we changed the league documents to allow certain teams over the years. It's evolved now from 1 to 2 to 3 DPs and now homegrown. It's very complicated, but it has allowed somewhat in 30 teams today. They can sign players above and beyond the salary cap. And it makes it a very interesting milieu, if you will, because the MLS is a parity driven league and the team owners and the sporting directors and the managers and the coaches who figure out the rules well and learn how to manage it for a long time. That is part and parcel and almost really important to becoming successful, over time in the MLS. But David Beckham and his arrival started that change, which will continue to evolve. Freddie, 10 years from now, if anybody is listening to this, I doubt that they will, but the league will look more like the leagues in Europe than it will look like now. Just as now, 2026, the league looks very different than the rules and the product on the field in 2006 or 7 when Beckham came over. So his presence, apart from the fact that he was an global icon, really started changing the league documents, which I think will be one of his greatest gifts to us, because you see it now with Messi and we see it continuing. We are going to inch, maybe jog, towards the way the rest of the world does it. We may never get there exactly because we're Americans, but everything is gravitating towards the international norm, which I think is fine. Stop complaining about it. And that's another issue. Yes, we're probably not going to have relegation and promotion.
Just about to ask you.
Other thing, yeah. But we're going
USL's
towards
doing it.
That's true. That's true. Great for the USL, man. Lots of wonderful things afoot for anybody who's involved in the USL. If you've ever been to a high level USL game, man, I'm not saying the MLS people should be nervous, but hey, there's another way of doing it. Who thought there's more than one way to get to what you want in America? So
Let me tell you something.
The USL people.
Who would have thought in today's age? I mean, I guess maybe it's obvious, but for us older cats, you couldn't access or watch soccer. I had to go to the Dickens Inn in Old City to watch Premier League. Well, I don't even think it was called Premier League at that time. But I guess my point is, I turn on the TV now, I see USL on ESPN, I see soccer everywhere. Yesterday was Champions League, and it's wonderful. And it's wonderful that we have all that access. You mentioned Messi real quick. It's a different era, a different player. I think it's a different league. What has Messi changed? And maybe what has he not changed?
Yeah, well, listen, who would have thought 10 years ago, any Yank, you and me, people who are listening, even our sons or daughters, Who would have thought that Messi and at least three other, world-renowned figures would have come to America and donned pink jerseys with two herons? They're not flamingos, as I like to tell my kids. The patch is two herons. Anyway, who would have thought that Messi would have shown up on our shores, the tail end of his career, and bringing with him some other guys, within 2 years, winning the best overall community shield on his second year, and then third year in the league, actually winning the cup, and the cachet that he's brought to the league and the eyeballs he's brought to the league. Yeah. And his American story is not yet over. And of course, it's changing. He and teams like Inter Miami are going back to the league documents. Those teams are going to push the league because of their cachet and the amount of money involved more towards the American model without breaking it. Breaking it would mean promotion relegation. I think, if you're briefly, if you're going to put $500 million into the league like FC San Diego 2 years ago, your lawyer would never let you pony up $500 million if the next year or two you could go down. You would not be playing major league soccer. You would be playing in the hinterlands. It's just not going to happen. I would love, my students would love, my wife would love, even though she doesn't know what relegation means, but she would love it. We would all love it if we could have promotion relegation, but there are a lot of reasons why we just can't do it. Okay, it goes back to the founding documents of the league, and then it goes back 125 years or so to how America died almost, the professional stuff. So there's reasons why we do it. But back to Messi and Messi's kind of teams, those that are buying players and are not necessarily putting a lot into their own youth academy. They just want to be a European model where money moves, You can take a look. The top 10 teams in the world that have the top 10 wage bills are in the top 12 in the whole world. So there's a correlation, and this has been written about, between the amount of money you spend and the product on the field. Well, Americans are running towards that. And Messi, again, like Beckham, perhaps, it's both the cachet of bringing a global superstar, but it's also the league documents and the founding ideas of how the league is run that are being changed by these superstars. And that should be a part of their story. They're helping Americans move towards the way the rest of the world does it, with the caveat that promotion relegation is probably here to stay, which is interesting because that makes this league wonderful and not wonderful in the same breath. Why is it wonderful? Because owners love the idea that you can't get relegated, right? Listen, it'll be interesting to see where we are 10 to 15 years from now, because there's leagues and teams all around the world that have owners that look at what the MLS does, and they don't publicly say it, but they would love to buy into a locked league where people are up and coming and love soccer and have 330 million people and a good segment of the population with money. Come on. The MLS is a good bet, man. If anybody has a couple $1 million around, invest in an MLS team. It might be a good thing.
Okay, so now we're here. The MLS is bigger. Academies are better. We got players in Europe. Probably a lot of them that are over there in Europe come from YSC. Messi's here. The World Cup's coming. Where is American soccer right now?
I was an MLS, I wouldn't say hater, but I wrote this op-ed, by the way, back in 2007 that was complaining about American soccer. It's ironic because here I am teaching at the very place that I wrote an opinion piece that was published in the Philadelphia Daily News, complaining about why a group of investors in my neck of the woods would buy a team and bring it to Chester, Pennsylvania, 18 miles south of Philadelphia, that wouldn't know a soccer ball if it washed up on the shores of the Delaware River. I think that was a line in it. And it was funny when I was interviewing for the job with Nuha and Richie, I was hoping that this op-ed wasn't going to be brought up because it certainly was a rather dim view of the MLS at the time. Now listen, briefly, 2006 to 2007, the MLS, I think, had 12 teams in 2007-8, when I wrote this thing. Only 5 of them were operating in a soccer-specific stadium. The league was still losing money. 2 teams had been lost in 2002. We weren't sure where we were going, we, meaning the whole MLS universe. And the owners had been amidst behind the scenes and making some changes and quadrupling down. I think that's a line right from Dan Garber and some of the owners. They decided in 2002, 3, 4 to double down, create this entity called SUM, has its own story where it's generating money for all the owners that buy into the league. You're not just buying into the league and your right to organize and put your product on the field in your region, but you're also buying into this other corporate structure that's gobbling up media rights, right? People need to make money. It's the way it works in America. You know, it was not exactly optimistic. And certainly, Grant Wall, much better writer than I am, he says as much in his book at the time that was published 2010 or whatever about the Beckham experiment. We didn't know. Nobody knew where we were going. But you flash forward now to the MLS, right, of the 2026 era. Okay. We have 30 teams operating in 30 markets with potentially one or two more coming down the pike. This rivals the NFL, NHL, MLB, okay, and the NBA, the number of teams. It is making money, okay, for the owners. You have a locked league structure. You have 25 of 30 teams playing on soccer specific stadiums. If anybody has ever been, I have not, but I've heard from people and I've researched it, a game at St. Louis or in San Diego, just to name two, my goodness, the beautiful fields. I mean, St. Louis field has won international awards for venues for sporting events. It's a beautiful structure. So is San Diego's. And, you know, whenever NYCFC unveils their mammoth building, you know, it's soccer in America in terms of the construction side, the soccer specific, man, we're on a tear because we Americans can build stuff. Okay. We have good engineers and architects, and it's really amazing. And if you look, every team also now in 2026, as opposed to 2005 era, has a fully functioning youth academy. Now, some, like the union, are pouring money and resources and personnel into it. Others are not. Now, that is another 20 podcasts, and people have lots of opinions about it. But let's just look at the facts. Stable for 30 years, 30 teams, 25 playing in a soccer-specific stadium. All teams are playing some homegrowns. Some teams are playing more than others, which means you can play for your club's badge within the system across the 30 teams. And you can, if you're really good, earn a homegrown contract and make it from your second team onto your first. And many of these guys, and they're all around the league, you can make six figures. You can play every weekend throughout the 9 months of the league. You can be watched in your local hometown and on high definition Dolby 5.1 from your Apple package in America in 3 time zones playing a sport that you love. This is real. And theoretically, although it's very difficult, just like every sport, it's hard to become a pro, but we have pipelines now. They're still relatively narrow. Okay, I got it. But you do have a pipeline on the summit, the peaks of the summit, if I could say, MLS. I'm not, no disrespect to USL, but MLS is at the top of the peak and it's got 30 of them. But there's 30 youth academies and local independent clubs that are pushing kids up and they're playing on all 30. Why do we spend more time complaining about MLS than at least acknowledging that we're on the right path? We still have a ton of work. There's still lots of problems with youth development. They're not going to get fixed overnight. But if you take a look for us, if we're honest, us meaning we're us old barks that are getting into our 50s now. Happy birthday to you a couple of days ago. I'm 58. I'm an old man. But if you look at the MLS and the USL and the American Soccer Nation now, and you compare it to any other decade in the United States soccer history that goes back 150 years, so take the 15 decades, you cannot reasonably dispute that the world from where we are now looks more optimistic materially than any other decade.
Absolutely. Maybe that's a good segue into what I felt like was the heart of the book, in my opinion, which is the idea of total immersion. I would love to understand what you mean by that. And you just touched a little bit in terms of what YSC is doing. Maybe tell me what you mean by total immersion, because we don't lack the field. We don't lack the money. But you're still saying we're lacking something.
Yeah, sure. Freddie, so going back to why is this chapter in the book? Total immersion is actually a concept that could have a whole book devoted to it, and other people brighter than me who have jobs within the system. Like, I'm not a coach. I'm not an investor. I'm an English teacher who writes on the side, right? I love football. I have a kid in the program, but I don't aspire to, and even claim to know how to necessarily fix soccer or move the needle. But I have an idea, and I couldn't end the book. I could have ended the book in chapter 19 by saying, well, this summer the United States is going to enter the World Cup, and we've finished one time in the final 8, 2002, and 14 other times, we've been in the World Cup and we've made the final 16, maybe 6 times, whatever it was, blah, blah, blah. Let's hope for the best, period. End of story. Buy my next book. I didn't want to end it that way. I wanted to have another chapter, which took another 6 months to write because I interviewed through various helpful people that would give me the names. Hey, call this person. Hey, Mark, call that person. And this is, again, underscoring a model, a theme in the book. Soccer people are all connected. If I get Brendan Sullivan, who says call X, Y, and Z, I call X, Y, and Z. Well, then they give me 2 or 3 people to talk to, at which point I accumulated 20, 25 conversations, much like we're having now with me shutting up. Believe me, I can shut up and listen to other people. So I had all these conversations with like Will Kunst, who's he's the sporting director of LA Galaxy, Chris Albright. Ironically, I used to coach, not so well, but here he is, a major director, winning awards, getting paid a handsome salary and working really hard for FC Cincinnati, to Jim Curtin, who's coming out of retirement, hopefully one of these days, to all these cats that know a lot more about soccer than I do. Tim Howard, he wrote the foreword in my book. He got me in touch with others, and Kobe Jones. I mean, the list goes on. So what was I trying to do? Okay, I have one chapter, 10 pages. How can we leave this book, which is positive? Recall what I'm trying to do. This book's title, American Soccer Nation. The subtitle is The Remarkable 150-Year History of Yanks on a Roll. Yanks on a roll. Hopefully some people see the pun. We're moving in the right direction. We're not winning anything at a high level anytime. We're not going to win the World Cup this summer. Okay. But we're trying to move the needle positively. So how can I end the book, but not make it all about the union? Because that's something I wanted to be careful with. This book has a national audience. Of course, it's rooted in the DNA of my daily life here at YC Academy and the bigger Philadelphia Union franchise. But this book is a national book for anybody, whether they're elite athletes or soccer moms who don't know much about football but love football because their kids are playing it, or soccer dads like us who think we know stuff, but we really haven't read all that much, and to try to tell a compelling story. So that leads me to this idea. Well, people have been talking about this. So I'm not saying that mine is any better than anybody else's, but the idea that I wanted to end on that I didn't have until I'd talked to 20 people and started writing from the interview tapes was total immersion. I think it's original. I haven't done a global search, but the gist of total immersion is, can we figure out a way to totally immerse our young men? Women are different. I'm luckily going to write under contract. I'm going to write the next one on the women's if I have time, but I'm talking about young men. How can you immerse young men, elite footballers, soccer players, totally in the soccer environment? And I did tell this anecdote, so I won't repeat it, I think on an early part of the podcast, where what do you do when you're not training, right? You can do 90 minutes of soccer and supplement it with high-end lifting or functional training like what Alex Ramos is doing, or small group training like Brendan Sullivan's in Extra Time. And that is great. You got to do all this stuff if you want to perform at the highest level. Really, I'm a proponent of it, right? But where you go to school matters. And that's the trick that I think more MLS owners and directors ought to think about. How can we create an environment where our kids are getting top-notch coaching instruction and all the money and time and personnel there? But if you just divorce the other 22 hours of the day, you're missing the ability to supercharge American talent in a way that other cultures don't, because in other cultures don't have to deal with it. For example, if you're a young kid in some of these soccer mad countries, you're immersed in soccer all day, every day. It's just the way it's been done in your country for decades and going back even over 100 years. Well, that doesn't really exist in America unless your dad and your mom are soccer mad. And even when we're soccer mad, you still can't reproduce it because your kid's going to a local school, or he's got 3 other sports going on, and people don't really talk that much about it in his social circles, but not kids at the Union, not kids at LA Galaxy, not kids at the Red Bulls, and a half a dozen. Not all 30 MLS teams are doing it, but my estimation, 30-40% maybe I'm being too ambitious, of the MLS teams are creating their version of a total immersion environment or something like it. And what does it mean? It means trying to underscore that the journey cannot just be solely about what happens 90 minutes a day or an hour and a half game on the weekend. That the apparatus that you're creating has to involve the educational component in some way, because Americans need to have a safety net. Some Americans don't care. Let's be honest. Some will say, I don't care about education, but the vast majority of people that are producing, they want to have an educational outlet, and they do. It's called soccer in college. So why wouldn't more people follow what the union is doing in Dallas? And I mean, I could go around the league. There's, 1/3 maybe are doing something really remarkable and pushing kids into these total immersion environments. And that, I firmly believe, will move the soccer needle. Maybe not this summer, this summer we'll see what happens. But I'm talking about 10, 20 years from now. What could America be on the international stage? I'm not going to say they're going to win the World Cup, but why wouldn't a Final Eight or a Final Four be out of our reach in the next 20 years if half the MLS clubs poured money and took seriously their youth academy? The union, by the way, we have 7 of our graduates in the last 13 years have been capped by the full U.S. national team, where once there was a swamp or gravel down here in along the Delaware River, right? 13 years ago, there's nothing down here. Well, fast forward 13 years later, a full 7 of our graduates have been capped. They're up to 103 caps. 103 times graduates of this little school, this one program has been capped by the full U.S. national team. And that's before this summer's World Cup, right? And listen, the union won two community shields, right? And we lost in the finals a couple years ago in the cup, and we're not doing well right now. But listen, take the long view. There is no doubt, and the stats do not lie, that what Richie and a whole host of others here with the YC Academy and the franchise and the union have able to do in terms of youth development is an unmitigated success story, even if there's still stuff to complain about. It's far from perfect, but the statistics don't lie. My wonder and my urging is, come on, MLS owners, Americans with deep pockets, right? Figure out a way to honor and take seriously youth development, get the USSF more involved, get the local super clubs involved to realize that we're all connected, try to push your players into the better teams. And if they happen to get plucked by an MLS Next program, blazon it all over your webpage. Celebrate it. Find a way, instead of complaining about losing your best players, use it as a way to market yourself. Because we all win when kids get pushed up to the pro level or get sold. Half of our kids are not playing first team here. I would say maybe, I don't know the statistics, but most of our kids who get signed are playing somewhere else. That's a success story. So total immersion, immerse the kids and not just the football. It's the academics. It's not going to look like YSC Academy and the union because it has to be patterned upon your own environment and where you are, and push kids and celebrate their victories and push them up and try to make them better and see where we're going to be 10 to 20 years. That would be my dream. And I don't think it's unrealistic that more people can't have the forethought and the vision to realize that when we do well in youth development, that will benefit the second teams. It'll benefit the colleges, it'll certainly benefit the first teams, and the best of the best will be playing in MLS in Europe, and it'll benefit the national team. And everybody wins in the long term when more money and more seriousness and more personnel and more intelligence is brought to bear on these factories that are honestly mostly the MLS teams and the super clubs around the country. So it's not just MLS, but it is other clubs. Let's be honest. They're doing some great things too. It's not just the local MLS team.
That's right. Well, I'm going to say it here first. Mark Franek coined total immersion. What was your favorite chapter to write? Was it that chapter?
Yeah, you know what? It's like when you ask an author what his or her favorite chapter, it's tough, man. Some writers hate writing. Don't listen. 3:15. All my kids here go out to train. If that makes sense. Like I've said this in this podcast. 3:15. The building is quiet. They're all training, and the faculty go home around 4. And I have a glorious 3:15 to 6 o'clock to write. And I love writing. There's nobody bothering me. I don't have papers to grade that time, and I just can write. And I do like writing. So I don't have a favorite chapter, but I do like, the beginning and the end of the book. For people who may pick up the book, first off, Tim Howard's forward is excellent. Al Sullivan is so much fun to read his forward. It's really funny. A lot of anecdotes from the Sullivan family. It's always amusing. Love Cal's forward. And then the first and last chapter of the book, you cannot read it without understanding and celebrating what's going on at the union. Again, I didn't want to make it about the union, but I have to write about what I know. And, but it's an interesting story. It really talks from the insider perspective about what's going on at this place, which is hopefully a model for others. Yeah. I mean, I think what I would want listeners to know is that what I tried to do in this book is tell a foundational, confident, optimistic soccer story that goes back 150 years, that does not dive into statistics or charts or diagrams. None of that is in the book. It tells stories that 10 to 12 pages per chapter that covers 10 to 20 years of soccer history. So you can read it in a couple settings and you're left with not the dull, edgy, complaining and whining about American soccer. I stay away from that. It doesn't mean I don't cover the many times the soccer ambassadors have shot themselves in the foot, turned the gun on the ball in America, almost ready to extirpate the ball. Like, I don't shy away from that. But overall, I want to tell confident, optimistic, let's be inspired about where we are and where we're going. Okay. And it's okay that we have warts and that we do things the American way. We may not get it right. We may or may not do great this summer, but that doesn't change our trajectory. Okay. Let's be positive. So yeah, I don't have a favorite chapter, but I just love the fact that I'm lucky every day to be in a front row seat watching young men, not just here, but some of the super clubs, fine tuning their skills, going on, some going pro, some going to college. And you just know that these people are going to go out into the world and they're going to bring with them a love for soccer, and they're going to get married and have kids and young men, and they're going to continue the cycle. And to be one small part in that journey is just magnificent. I feel bad for my wife, who's probably billing some hours right now on some stupid issue of just making money turn hands. And I'm about ready to go back in class right now and meet my young men who just got back from MLS Next Flex. So I'm living the dream.
Yeah, you are. Mark, where can people buy this book?
Oh yeah, the book can be bought anywhere where books are sold. There's also, I might as well just end on a little bit of a shilling. The students in the class and others and I have designed an American Soccer Nation, right? That's the name of the book, American Soccer Nation. If I get lucky enough to finish the women's version, it'll be something like that, American Women's Soccer Nation. So American Soccer Nation is the name of the book. And the students have designed a crest, like a soccer crest with that phrase. That's going to be trademarked, American Soccer Nation, and proceeds, a bit of the proceeds from every book and from every t-shirt, and that can be found on the website, or hat that's sold goes to help YSC Academy. And I'm looking to get more of a national youth soccer that I could also donate to. So it's not all about the union. So yeah, it helps. Listen, nobody makes millions of dollars writing a book on American soccer. It's not about that. But if the book sells a little bit and some people buy some gear, a lot of the money will go into helping young people.
I love it. And listeners, I'll have all of this in the details description below. Listen, Mark, I said this before and I'll end it with this. I genuinely enjoyed the book. It really makes you think about American soccer and how it always has been here. And it's also very American, the story of soccer. It falls down, gets in its own way, misses its chances, but it comes back. And that's pretty damn American to me. So, I appreciate you doing this. I wish you all the best. I'm going to be following along, hopefully your next book, and we'll get you back on here and we'll do some stuff together and just celebrate this wonderful game that we're so blessed to be a part of.
Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, listeners.
Awesome.